I've seen the glory of the Lord shine in the hearts of the most unlikely people in a most unlikely place, and the glory of the Lord has reflected from them into my heart, and it's given me courage.
His voice is familiar on radio. Charles Morris is our guest for this edition of First Person. Welcome, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Charles is the host of Haven Today on many radio stations. He's an experienced journalist who has turned his effort towards God's kingdom in his role as president of Haven Ministries. Plus, he's an author. His latest book is titled Fleeing ISIS, Finding Jesus, telling the stories of Christians persecuted in the Middle East. And we'll get to the conversation with Charles in just a moment. Your support of the Far East Broadcasting Company makes this program possible. FEBC proclaims Christ in many hard-to-reach countries of the world and believes in telling the stories of God at work in the world. Learn more about FEBC by visiting firstpersoninterview.com and clicking on the FEBC banner. Well, the journalist in Charles Morris means he cannot sit here in North America and tell the story of the persecuted church from here. So he decided to visit countries like Jordan and Iraq to learn firsthand the real story of God at work. He'll describe some of that today, but as we began talking in our respective studios, I asked him to begin with a word about his radio program.
I'm in my 18th year of leading this ministry, but the ministry is just celebrating an 84th birthday, founded in Hollywood, California. I'm the fourth speaker, and it began as the haven of rest. And in the 1930s, in the Great Depression, if you were on the radio, you had to have a music group. We had a male quartet. We had a theater organ playing underneath the entire program.
Of course,
just like
you have to have that,
at a movie theater. And my predecessor dropped the name Rest because we kept getting calls thinking we were a retirement home or a crematorium. And after 9/11, I added Today, because my background, I was one of those bad guys. I was a secular journalist.
Oh, boy.
And in my 20s, I was running from the Lord. I knew the Lord, Wayne, but I was running from the Lord. I was a Jonah. But thank God he reeled me back in like he did Jonah. And so it changed my whole life, you know. So anyway, I'm very thankful. I enjoy what I'm doing now. And basically, the older I get, and I'm in my 60s now, I just enjoy seeing what the Lord is doing around the world.
Amen.
Because I want to be encouraged in my faith, but I want to encourage couch potato Christians where I live in their faith to get off the couch, because I need to get off the couch.
Well, you and I think a lot alike in many ways, and that's certainly one of them. Charles, I wanted to talk to you today because you've written just an outstanding book called Fleeing ISIS, Finding Jesus, the real story of God at work. Now, give us the background on this. You've been, as you said, you like to travel and hear God's stories around the world. You've been to the Middle East a number of times, haven't you?
I have. I'm up to 3 times in Iraq, but more than that gone through Turkey, more than that in Jordan. And of course, as a ministry leader, we do tours to Israel. So I've been to Israel many, many times. And but I guess, you know, I'll confess to this. I do read the New York Times. But I also read Fox News and other news sites as well. And I don't know if one is more fake news than the other. We're living in chaotic times here. But 2 summers ago, Wayne, I read an article in the New York Times written, I'm sure, by a non-Christian reporter, but asking the question, is Christianity dead or dying in the Middle East? And just for the record, I don't like to travel, but I like to be there anymore.
Right. I understand the difference, right?
Exactly. So I couldn't get this off my brain, you know. Is Christianity dead or dying in the Middle East? So I looked around to find out who's the largest Christian organization doing anything in the Middle East. Turns out it's Samaritan's Purse. I've done things with Voice of the Martyrs too, but I contacted Samaritan's Purse, and they were very kind. the country director was very kind. He just spent a week taking me around the country, and I took our videographer and our web programmer with me because he is always ready to do something like this. And so we just traveled around the country, and the thing I kept running into was people who had become Christians. And I'm talking about former Muslims, former Yazidis, and people that I would call nominal Christians, and we can get into that if you want. Mm-hmm. And many of them would, especially the former Muslims, came to Christ by way of a dream or a vision of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's one thing, there's not a lot of community and commonality of they just don't have the means of communication like we do. And but for this book that you were referring to, did 100 interviews, and what you find people will tell you, you ask them, tell me about yourself, what's your faith? They'll say, well, I'm a lover of Jesus. And they didn't read that in a book. They didn't hear Christian radio to tell them that. It just comes out of them. I'm a lover of Jesus.
Well, you describe them as the most remarkable Christians you know. Talk to me more about why they're remarkable.
Well, for one thing, they pray for their enemies. and I can't say I always do that, or other Christians I know in the Western Hemisphere do that. They pray for those who persecute them. They pray for ISIS, yes, they don't like ISIS, but they also see the hand of God. And the strange thing is, ISIS, of course, doesn't realize this, Wayne, but the Spirit of the living God is using ISIS to actually promote the gospel of Jesus Christ in a most unlikely part of the world.
All right, you have to explain that one further.
Well, it's they don't know, like Cyrus, or like many ancient rulers that were not God-fearers. They worshiped idol gods, worshiped themselves, that were in Iraq or what would have been called Babylon or Assyria. Nimrud, the ancient city from Genesis 10, where Nimrod would walk out to the tell that's still there. I was just there about 5 weeks ago. And the locals, the Muslim villagers, will tell you the story about how King Nimrod would climb this large hill, massive hill, and would tell the God of the heavens that I'm greater than you. And of course, we read about that in Genesis 10, and I was probably very close to where ancient Babylon was located, and I was. And at the same time, I was 20 miles south of Mosul, which is ancient Nineveh. And ISIS, of course, being who they are, they want to stamp out all other religion. They want to stamp out history. So the gate that Jonah would have entered to preach a message of repentance that led to a revival in ancient Nineveh, they've managed to destroy that massive gate
it's
in
gone.
a couple of years. So wow. You could, the American, 20 miles south in Nimrud, every time U.S. Planes would let a bomb down over Mosul trying to get rid of ISIS, you wouldn't just hear the bomb. The earth would literally shake underneath you, even 20 miles away. Mm-hmm. And I was as close as 4 miles from Mosul. I promised our board and my wife I wouldn't go into Mosul, but 4 miles away. But you could hear the mortars being lobbed, the chatter of AK-47s, and of course, thankfully, I didn't see any of what just has started up again a few days ago, and that was
as we speak, the battle for Mosul is going on. It's a fierce battle, as a matter of fact. Now, I want to take you back to something, Charles. You said that they pray for their enemies. When we think about praying for our enemies, we think about someone that did us wrong or cut us off in traffic or that kind of silly thing. But when they pray for their enemies, they're praying for the very people who are out to destroy their life and take their life.
Yes, and take their homes away from them, and have in most instances. Yeah, it's they don't linger so much on the evil of ISIS as to they really take the words of Jesus to turn the other cheek and forgive their enemies. They take that literally in a way I don't see as much of where I live, and I don't see so much of in my own life. And I see this particularly among the Christians, like in Karakosh, an ancient town of 60,000. It would be the largest Christian town it's an island in the Sea of Islam in the Middle East, and nobody can go back. There are no homes. I've had Christian friends where I live say, "Oh, well, once we get rid of ISIS in Mosul, well, everybody can go back home." They don't have any homes to go back to.
No, it's destroyed.
Absolutely. And one of the other things we don't take into account is ISIS was able to capture all of the American weapons and munitions that we gave to the Iraqi troops, and the thousands of Iraqi troops dropped them because they were so afraid and fled from the ISIS soldiers of much fewer numbers. They've taken that, and they have manufactured more and planted more mines, more landmines, more IEDs, booby traps, than in any other conflict in human history. So when I was there a few weeks ago, I went into some of these churches that they had taken over in Karakosh, and as they were forced to flee by coalition forces, they would booby-trap the doors, so that hoping that Christians would come back, open the doors to their church so they could go in and pray, and they could kill a few more Christians. And I was actually doing a radio interview, and I hadn't heard the Iraqi soldier who was looking after us and had helped with taking the mines out of this church. I started to walk through a doorway, and the videographer, cameraman that I had with me, he reached out his arm and just grabbed me as I was live on an interview, and because they hadn't dismantled the booby trap that was in that room of the church. So it's and yet what has happened, back to the way ISIS is promoting the Great Commission, people who since the 2nd century, there are denominations, maybe even into the 1st century, but at least the 2nd century, there are denominations in Iraq, in Syria, that can trace their roots back to the disciples, or the disciples of the original disciples. And in some villages, like Al-Kosh, which is about 30 miles from Mosul, they still speak Aramaic, the same language as Jesus. They pray the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. And yet, for them, it's the religion, for many of them, not all, it's the religion of their fathers. It's religion that goes back many generations. And yet, because of ISIS, their faith has become real. Even priests that I've met will start speaking in language that will relate to any born-again Christian in the Western Hemisphere.
His book, Fleeing ISIS, Finding Jesus, tells these stories, and we'll learn more from Charles Morris coming up in a moment.
This is Ed Cannon, president of the Far East Broadcasting Company. The interview we're listening to reminds me of the remarkable way that God uses those who follow Christ to do great things for Him. At FEBC, we broadcast in nearly 50 countries of the world. Our staff always speaking in the local language, sharing the gospel, and teaching the word to millions every day. If you'd like to know more about FEBC, please click on the FEBC banner at firstpersoninterview.com.
My guest is Charles Morris. Charles is the host, of course, of Haven Today on radio and the author of Fleeing ISIS, Finding Jesus, which is what we're talking about today here on First Person. Charles, this had to be a very emotional experience for you to take this latest trip and all the trips that you've taken to the Middle East, especially when you sit down with these persecuted Christians whom ISIS has just destroyed everything that they own and forced them to flee.
Well, yes, Wayne, it's even the non-Christians, standing at one of those mass graves of Yazidis at the base of Sinjar Mountain was probably. I've been to a German concentration camp in my life, and that was very sobering. But I've never had more angst than standing next to a little field of nothing but bones and bleached out bones with some shreds of clothing still there because ISIS didn't even bother to bury them. But aside from all the evil and the fact that right now 2,000 troops left in Mosul, a third of those are child soldiers, not teenagers, child soldiers. More than that are just the stories of how Christ has worked in somebody's heart and in their life. And, if we have time, I could give you a current story that I heard a few weeks ago. I could give you a dream story. You pick, Wayne.
Let's pick it up wherever you want to pick up. I just want to, as the time remains, I want to hear some of these stories.
Well, okay. This is about a month ago. I have a friend of mine who works for a humanitarian aid organization, grew up in Chicago, right next to Wheaton, and comes out of a Brethren background. They study the Bible, serious students of the Bible, and yet this friend of mine, at age 33, with two great little kids and his wife, had never shared the gospel with anybody else one-to-one, personally. And so he's on the outskirts of Mosul doing what they call an assessment on how much food, how many blankets, because it's very cold in the winter, just like summers are equally hot. He's doing this assessment, and this staff car of the Peshmerga, that's the Kurdish army, rolls up behind him and screeches to a stop, and out jumps a guy who it turns out is the commander of their special forces. Not a guy you would want to meet in a dark alley. This guy's a tough guy, and the Peshmerga are the finest fighting forces in the Middle East, and I'd put them ahead of the Iranian Guard. So anyway, he says, "Are you an American?" Yes. Get in the car. You're a Christian. They assume all Americans are Christians over there. So he gets in the car. The guy says to my friend, Islam has done nothing for my people, and it has done nothing for me. I want to know how to become a Christian.
He was that blunt.
So my friend is, very blunt. And so this friend of mine, who's never shared his faith personally with anybody in his life, he just happened to have his little pocket Bible that he keeps with him as he has to travel around the world. So he pulls his pocket Bible out. He didn't know what else to do. But I'm sure running through his mind was, that the Spirit would provide the words you need to say. And so he just starts reading long passages of Romans to this guy. And at the end of the hour, great tears are welling down this toughened commander's face. And he and his driver pray to receive Christ. Now, that's a beautiful story, but it gets even better. Okay. When I was there a month ago, he found out we were going to be near his base, and so he asks my friend to stop by, and my friend had told him I was this radio pastor visiting from America. Well, bring him by, and he gave us a time. We got there, and we discovered why. Just leaving were 3 U.S. Army Special Forces. And these two, guys with crushing handshakes but smiling faces, and we introduced ourselves to each other. But they had been visiting with this guy, and so we went on into his base at his headquarters, and there were the current battle maps on the walls around the room, but there on the operations table was a Bible. And I've seen that same Bible in Arabic and English because I bought one in Jerusalem, just inside the Damascus Gate. And he saw me looking at that Bible, and he started laughing, and he gave me the greatest smile that I think I've ever seen. And he said, "I just wanted to tell those U.S. Army guys from America that I'm now a follower of Jesus, and I wanted to ask them if they are a follower of Jesus. So there again is the reverse Great Commission at work, Wayne.
The beat goes on, doesn't it? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
You interviewed Christians who have fled because of ISIS. Tell me one of their stories, just quickly.
Well, yes, absolutely, and I've done a lot of that, especially in Jordan, which, even though it's a Muslim country, it would be about as safe as you could find in the Middle East. And I'm thinking of a young couple that he's well, I guess I shouldn't say his name, but anyway. He's about 25. His wife is 20. They have a little girl who I think has just now had her second birthday. And he was almost killed in a bus explosion by Al-Qaeda before ISIS. And then ISIS came through their town, this Karakosh that I just mentioned, and they have no home to go back to. And so we introduced them to a church in Vancouver, British Columbia. They're going in. They've got a house for them, a job, English language, and this guy calls me Mr. Charles when he emails me, Mr. Charles. I got my physical yesterday, or I met with the Canadian Embassy. Most of these people want to go home.
Yes.
But like I said earlier, they have no home to go to.
Yeah, we don't understand that. They would rather go home than anything else, but what's left?
Of course. But they have no family left. Their families are either dead or totally dispersed. It's a diaspora of not Jews, but of other people groups. And yet at the same time, when this guy emails me and says, Mr. Charles, there is always this joy of the Lord. Now, he would have considered himself a Christian, but only because of ISIS would he now consider himself a born-again Christian. It's kind of like the gold dealer in Mosul that I include the story of in the book. He tried to stay, thinking he could pay the Muslim head tax, but of course ISIS doesn't even follow the rules of Islam. And he finally starts to get out. He loads up his big Mercedes with all the gold he could fit in it because he was a multimillionaire. And he gets to the last checkpoint, and it turns out the Kurds have left, the Peshmerga left, and it's ISIS. And so they end up seeing what he has in his car. They give him back his shoes, but they keep his passport, his Mercedes, and his gold. And this man, who's around my age, had to walk like 30 miles to safety. Oh, he tells you, I called myself a Christian, but now, even though I have nothing, I have everything because I have Jesus. Oh. That's what's going on there. That's what we need to have going on in our hearts too, Wayne.
My thanks to Charles Morris for taking the time to talk with us about the stories he's found that reveal how believers are victorious in the midst of suffering. The book you'll want to read is titled Fleeing ISIS, Finding Jesus, and we will place links on our website, firstpersoninterview.com. I'd like to thank the Far East Broadcasting Company for their support of this program, allowing us to find and bring you these stories each week. FEBC's extensive broadcast ministry has seen remarkable results in terms of people of many cultures turning to Christ and learning His Word. And your support of FEBC is vital. Learn more at firstpersoninterview.com. Next week, we'll talk with missiologist Patrick Johnstone, who wrote Operation World. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd, inviting you to join us next week for First Person.